Hello, everyone. Again, I greet you with the words of the Lord Jesus, Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you. As I had mentioned last week, what I wanted to do on Sundays after worship is to talk about one of the passages that I didn't preach from in the course of Sunday morning worship. This Sunday, I preached out of the gospel lesson in Matthew chapter 10, which left the Romans passage and the Genesis passage open for discussion today. And the passage that I want to focus in on in brief tonight is the passage from Genesis 22, the passage that the rabbis of old would refer to as the binding of Isaac, a story that is part of our lectionary series. It's also a story that has invoked much discussion in the rabbinic world, in the Christian world, over the times and over the years. It's a very difficult, problematic passage. For those of you not familiar with it, the story has Abraham being told by God to go to the land that he will show him and to offer his son, his only son, Isaac, as a sacrifice. And so Abraham takes his son, takes a couple of servants, goes to the place where God instructs him to go, and Abraham instructs his servants to stay with the animals, and then Abraham tells his servants that he and Isaac will go to offer sacrifice and will return to them. So Isaac takes the wood for the sacrifice bound on his shoulders, and they trudge up to Mount Moriah, and Isaac is asking Abraham, we've got the wood, we've got the other things for the sacrifice, where is the animal? And Abraham tells him that God will provide. And then on top of the altar, there's placed the wood, and Isaac is bound and placed on top of the wood. And right at the last minute, an angel of the Lord calls upon Abraham to cease and desist and not to lay his hand upon the child. And just at that moment, Abraham spots a ram caught in a thicket by its horns, and instead that becomes the sacrifice that is offered before God. Now, as you can well imagine, there are problems that people have with the stories, problems the rabbis from old had of the story. How could God ask Abraham to give up his only son? Doesn't God already know what Abraham has in his heart and how much he has been obedient to God? Why the requirement of the sacrifice? And an interesting take, and one I sort of tend to side with, that the rabbis came up with years ago, was that Abraham knew that God was not going to require him to offer a sacrifice. And in a sense, Abraham is pushing God to see what God will do and how faithful God will be in that promise. Notice that Abraham tells his servants that he and Isaac will go to offer the sacrifice and they will return to him. So Abraham has an inkling perhaps that God will provide, God will do something in the meanwhile, that God will not ask him to actually sacrifice the life of his only son. From a Christian point of view, I think it's kind of interesting to note that while God did not require Abraham to sacrifice his son, that God did not withhold his son for sacrifice on behalf of humanity. And one of the other sidebars, I think, out of the story is that it was instructive, I think, for the people of ancient Israel to realize that while other cultures around them, and there certainly were other cultures present, while those cultures may have required the sacrifice of children to the gods, Baal and Moloch, that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob does not require the sacrifice of children. I think that was one of the points that was being brought across in the telling of this story. You could obviously spend a lot of time digging into that passage. I made the decision early in the process that I wasn't going to go there, and actually had kind of gravitated towards the passage in Matthew early in the process. So the binding of Isaac really wasn't given serious consideration by me in terms of preaching this time around. But who knows, 3 years from now, that might be a different story if we're all in a different place. Until we have a chance to meet again, Shalom Aleichem, peace be with you.